Hello everyone, welcome to Get Started with Extended Events. I'm Kathi Kellenberger and I'm very happy to be part of the Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021. First, a little bit about me. I work for Redgate Software, where I'm the editor of Simple Talk and a DevOps advocate. I'm co-leader of the Data Platform Women in Technology group. And probably one of the coolest things that I do is that I'm a volunteer instructor at a nonprofit called Launch Code. Launch Code helps people get tech careers by providing free training and paid internships. The most important thing to know about me is that I'm a lifelong learner and teacher. You might find me once in a while on Twitter, and there's my email address in case you have any questions later. You might be like me, kind of drug to using extended events, kicking and screaming. Extended events were introduced in 2008, and at that time there was no user interface except using XML. So it was pretty difficult, but it wasn't long before Microsoft added a user interface to SQL Server Management Studio. So you think at that point, none of us would have an excuse about moving to extended events and away from Profiler and Trace. In fact, at one point, I made a commitment that I would never use Trace or fire up Profiler again, but I continually found myself using those tools, especially on my local development work or my local troubleshooting work. So what did it take? Well, finally, after seeing some really great presentations, one by Aaron Stellato and also from my friend and coworker Grant Fritchie, I was able to make the change and make the commitment to just use extended events. There's one reason I still use Profiler, and I'll explain that later on in this session. So hopefully you have an idea about what X events or extended events are. It's a way that we can capture all the things that happen on the server, and you can use this for troubleshooting, for query tuning, performance tuning. It's really a great tool for database administrators. The benefit of this is that it has very low impact on the server's performance. So if you think about firing up Profiler against a production server, that would be horrible, because the Profiler has just such a big footprint and it really should only be used like in a development or test environment. But there's things like Trace, even Trace has a much higher impact on performance. So the data in extended events comes back as XML. So that's one of the tricky things. But there is a nice interface that I'm going to show you, and there is also some limited support in Azure Data Studio if you would like to use that as well. So down here on this graphic is a picture of some data that came back when I was, looks like it's from last year, when I was just putting the slide together. So that's some data that's captured. So it is easy to take a look at. So what about Profiler and Trace? So they're deprecated. Really, Profiler is just the user interface for Trace, right? Deprecated, but a lot of people still use them. One drawback, besides the performance hit that I already mentioned, is that Microsoft is not putting anything new into Profiler and Trace. If there are new features, there's not going to be anything new in there for capturing. One example would be always on availability groups. There's nothing in Trace for monitoring availability groups, while there is in extended events. In every version of SQL Server, Microsoft adds more and more to it. So the problem is, if you're really invested and comfortable, right, this comfortable tool that you've used forever, how can we, move away from using that and measure the same thing? So later in this session, I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's take a look at an extended event and see exactly what it looks like and kind of how to get around in the tool. I'm working with SQL Server Management Studio running SQL Server 2019. And the first thing I want to do is just run some statements to make some configuration changes. I'm going to set some things and then I'm going to roll those back. And to find the extended events, look under Management, Extended Events, and then under Sessions. And there are some that are built in, like the Always On Health extended event. And there's a few, for example, let's see, capture statements. This is one that I just always keep around, just in case I need it, for example, for an ETL project or for a report, just to see what statements are actually hitting SQL Server. And notice that it's got a red square right here. That's because it's turned off. I just turn it on whenever I need it. So that's one thing that you can do, is if any bloggers post scripts for particular extended event sessions, or maybe some other folks who are giving presentations this week, maybe they'll share that code and you can set that up and just have it for whenever you need it. The one that I want to take a look at today is, or at least in this demo, is this configuration items changed. Okay, so I'm going to get out of Zoom really quickly. This one's already running. So what I can do, I could watch live data. If I do that, I need to go back to here and run this again, and hopefully the live data will show up. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that there is the name of the event, timestamp, the text, etc. Typically, when you view the data of a new extended event session, it's not going to show all of this information up here. That's one thing that I don't like, is that it looks a little weird at first. I think it only shows the name and the timestamp is all it really shows, and then you can add other pieces of information. So what you do if you don't know that is you click around here, and then you've got to go down to this bottom area to see the details, which gets kind of annoying. So maybe you don't know that you could just right click here, show column and table, and now you've got that information. So like I said, what we're looking at right now is the live data as things happen. You can filter it if you wish. Let's say there's like a whole bunch of data populated here. You might want to go ahead and filter it. You might want to clear it out, get rid of the old information if there's a lot of things coming in quick. You might want to stop the feed altogether. I think you can just probably, can I move them around? Let's see. If I choose columns, I can move them around here. Not letting me sort on this one, but you can sort on some of the other ones that are not live data. So this is the live data. And of course, you're not going to be able to go back in time and look at that. The other things that you can do is look at, if I expand this, a couple of other pieces of information. In this case, I have the package event file and I have the ring buffer. Let's take a look at the ring buffer first. If I right click and view target data, I'm looking at XML. Okay, so we're going to talk more about XML in a later demo, but this is not really useful for troubleshooting, because it's not tabular. I can also look at this package event file, view target data, and it looks more like that live data. However, it does go, if I scroll down, I might see, I see, well, actually it was right at the top, other dates. So you can see information over time and go back and troubleshoot, which is really great. If something happened yesterday, you can come back in here and look at it. This one has a little bit more information. You can sort, you can, let's see if I can just drag, still can't, it did work. Just drag columns around. We still have the filters. You can group information together. Let's not group on that one. Let's group on database name. So I can group on any particular field I'm interested in. I can even do aggregation. So let's say we want to know, let's see, the error number, just because it's an integer. Let's just add those up, which doesn't make sense, but just to show you that you can do it. So there's quite a few things you can do with the extended event. So let's go back to the slides and learn more about creating the event sessions. Now that you've seen an extended event and how to get around in the GUI, the next thing to know is how to create your own. First thing I want to show you is what the code looks like. Now, you don't have to write code to do this, but I just want to show you how simple the code is, and it's actually pretty easy to read. This little snippet of code here creates an extended event session to capture anytime a database file changes size. Compare that to this other code that is used for creating a trace. And this is just a small part of the code. It goes on and on. You really can't do this manually. You can't type this out manually. It'd just be impossible. So what most people would do is use Profiler to help them write this. But the extended event session is much more user-friendly. You can actually understand what it's about. This one, you really are only going to understand if there are comments, or like in this case, there's a file name telling you what it captures. Luckily, you don't have to write scripts unless you'd like to. There is a nice GUI you can use. There's also a wizard. And I'm not going to use the wizard. I'm going to show you the regular way to do this. But, if you'd like to use a wizard, that's fine. The first thing you need to do is select one or more events. This is probably the trickiest part because the names don't map one-to-one to trace. I am going to show you how to get around that in a later demo, how to figure this out. So I'm going to select one or more events, and then I click this little configure button, and it goes to another section where I can do some configuration. So first is this section called Global Fields Actions. So global fields are things that are available to you no matter what event you're capturing. So you could click any of these, and if you have multiple events, just hold the Shift key down and select multiple events if you want them to apply to more than one. It's also an action, so you've got to be very careful what you do here. Most of the time, they collect information. Okay, you can't use this to send an alert. However, they do things like break the process in the default debugger, create a mini dump. So be really careful about what you choose here. The next thing to look at is the filter. So in this case, I added a filter to where I just wanted to capture information about TempDB. Again, you can select multiple items by holding the Shift key down if you want the filter to apply to those multiple items. The last one on this configuration window are the event fields. Now, event fields apply to the specific extended event. So if I had multiple ones here and clicked around, I would most likely see different things collected. So these are things that make sense to collect. For example, database ID. This means that I don't need to collect database ID on the Global Fields tab because it's collected here. So you'll see overlap. I'm pretty sure everything that you can find here, you're also going to find on the Global Fields. In this case, database name is optional. So if you'd also like to see database name, just check that box. So that's all the configuration, but there's one more thing that we have to look at, and that's the target. This is the storage for the data that's collected. There are several items that you can choose from. However, I like these two. The ring buffer is a space in memory that captures the most recent extended event session data. So this is going to go away if you restart SQL Server, and older data is going to drop out. The reason I like this is that it's somewhat, well, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it can be queried. So for example, you can query this in a SQL agent job to send you an alert. And if your monitoring tool allows custom metrics and custom alerts, you can do the same thing there. The event file is another one I really like, and I don't like querying that because it is very difficult to do, because these files, in fact, they can get large. I like to change the settings so that they don't get large. They can be, I think the default is 1 gigabyte. I keep them much smaller. And the beauty of the event file is that your data is going to disappear from that ring buffer, and you can use the event file to go back further in time. So let's say I'm alerted that there's, let's say, a deadlock or something. Of course, that's going to be gone, and if I wait long enough, the data is going to be gone from the ring buffer as well, but I could still go back and take a look at the event file to see it, maybe the next day or whatever. I actually, when I gave this session at another event, someone said that they often take the event files, and we don't want those accumulating on the server, so they have a process that grabs old event files and archives them off so that they can query them later. You can query them, however, it's performance-wise, it's pretty slow. All right, now that you've seen what we can do, it's time to create an extended event session. I'm back working in SSMS, and in this demo, I'm going to show you how to create an extended event session. So the first thing I need to do is locate extended events, and then under that, find the sessions folder, right-click, and choose new session. Now I could choose new session wizard, but for this demo, I'm just going to choose new session. The first thing you need to do is give it a name. I'm going to call this one TempDB Growth. And also, there are templates. So if you're used to using templates in Profiler, you can find those same templates here. And those might be really interesting just to take a look at to see how things kind of map to Profiler. For this one, I'm just going to go with a blank template, no template. And I'm also going to start the event session at server startup, and also immediately after it's created, and I'm going to watch the live data on the screen as it's captured. Now, before I can save this, I have to obviously fill in the information. So I'm going to click on Events, and just because I know this is the thing to choose, File, Database File Size Change, and I'm going to move that over. Now, I'll tell you later how I figured that out, but for now, just trust me. I'm going to click Configure, and then if there's anything else that I would like to choose outside of the normal default, I can choose them here. So I might want to choose, for example, the client app name, you know, whatever it is that might be interesting to collect. Just be careful, don't collect too many things. It is possible, especially by collecting like a lot of T-SQL statements, that you could impact performance. So even though this is a much more lightweight utility than Trace, you still need to be careful with what you do. So I'm going to zoom out, and then I'm going to go over to the filter, and I'm going to choose database ID equals 2. So that way I'm capturing just TempDB. And then finally, over on the event fields, again, these are all collected automatically. I'm going to go ahead and choose database name as well. So I've got the event configured the way that I want it. And the last thing to do over here is choose data storage. There are a number of different target types, and I'm just going to talk about the two that I like to use, and you're welcome to go out and do some research and find out a little more about the other ones, but I'm not going to cover them here. The first one is ring buffer, and by default you get 1,000 events. I like to change this down to 100. Remember that this ring buffer is collecting just what's happening right now. I want to query that, and the more that's in there, the harder it's going to be to query. And I'm also going to switch this from 0, which means unlimited, to just 5. So I want to keep that really small. I'm also going to choose a event file. The reason I like event file is I like to go back and use the GUI tools to go back in time and take a look at the data collected. By default, these land in the same folder that the SQL Server error log file lands, but you could put it somewhere else. I'm going to change this down to 5 megabytes. And just because it is difficult, if you do want to query these, it's difficult to query them if they're very large. It just takes forever. You probably are not going to save, that many of them. So you can just use this at your discretion. As I mentioned during the slides, when I spoke on this at another event, there was a gentleman who said they archived these off, so they didn't collect on the server. But I like to keep them small. And I'm going to zoom back out and say OK. So now I've got it in place. I automatically got the live data. There is my extended event. And also, zoom in a little bit differently there. And also it's green. It's already running. Let me show you one more thing before we cause some TempDB growth. I can script this out to a new query window, and you can see that it's very easy, very little code involved to set this up. Basically, we say what events and actions. There's the filter. And then we've got our targets. So there really isn't much to setting these up, and you could always save these scripts off if you wish. So I'm going to go back over to my demo file here. So what I like to do is I like to play with these big transaction history tables from Atom Mechanic, just because I know it's going to create a lot of data here. So I'm going to create some large temp tables, drop them, and then shrink tempdb. So we'll let that run, hopefully not for too long. And we can, while that's going, we can take a look at live data, and you can already see some things are happening. Again, by default, when I create a brand new session, I'm only going to get these two, and I can come in here and let's see, show column and table, show column and table, show column and table. So I don't have to, I can look at it in a tabular fashion instead of just looking at the properties and going back and forth. So the interesting thing about this file size change is that it records automatic as well as manual, and it shows gross as well as shrinking, and it also shows the total size involved. So let's escape out of that and go back and see if our thing is done. So it's done, and I've got the size of tempdb, how big it is now. So that's how I would create an X event session and make sure that it works. Obviously, and I know that this has happened with me, sometimes I have to tweak the filter especially, or maybe tweak the action columns just to make sure that I get exactly what I'm looking for. So just like anything else, it's just going to take a little bit of tweaking. Now that you've seen how to create an extended event session, you may be wondering what you're going to do with all those profiler traces that you're already using. Luckily, Microsoft has provided a number of DMVs that can be used to map the old traces to extended event sessions. You know, it takes a little bit of work. There is one little gotcha. It's not great on the filters, but it's really not bad. So let's take a look at how to do this. I'm back working in SSMS, and in this demo, I'm going to show you how you can figure out which events you need to capture in your extended event sessions. So let's say that you have a trace set up that you really depend on, and you want to switch that over. So here I've got the trace definition. So if you have the trace definition already, that's great, because you'll be able to pull some information out of it that can help you do this. Even if you don't, there's some things you can do. So in this case, I'm going to run this query. It's been around, this function's been around forever. It shows me the traces I have set up. So I've got the default trace, and I've also got this tempdb growth file trace. So it's trace ID number 2. So I need to remember that. It's trace ID number 2. Now I could have a lot of them here. In this case, this is the only extra one I have. So the next thing I'm going to do is use this, again, another function for trace that's been around, but I'm going to add in here the trace ID, and I can see what it's capturing, 92 and 93. Okay, data file autogrow, log file autogrow. So that's good to know. If I have those numbers, that's fantastic. I could have gotten them actually from here as well. So let's go back over here. And another thing that you can do is use this query to find the column names that you're capturing. So that could be useful as well. If there's something special that you're capturing, you can find it there. So that's good to know. Another thing that you can do while you're, looking at this is at the filters. Do you have any filters? So if I go back and look at this one, there is a filter. Again, it's not really easy to understand, but there is a filter there, filtering for just tempdb. Really can't tell what it's doing in that trace file. It's really difficult to understand. Okay, so we can look at the filters. And you can grab this, all of these. Let me go back up just a minute. This path I'm going down, you can get that from this article. Let me do that so you can see more of the URL. If you want to just screen capture that real quick, you can kind of go down this path in this article. So that's where I've gotten this information. So let's take a look at the filters. And so I can see that for the event data file grow, auto grow, and log file auto grow, I'm filtering on the database ID, value equal to. That makes sense. That's tempdb. However, and it says equal. That's good. This logical operator here is what's kind of goofy. It will either be 0 or 1. If it's 0, that means there's no logical operator. A logical operator is going to be and or. The problem is it's 1 if it's and, it's 1 if it's or. So you need to maybe just kind of look at that. If you do have logical operator, you might have to think a little bit about what that could be, whether it's and or. It doesn't tell you. So that's kind of where it's great to have that original script if you've got it. All right, so here's the thing that really helps you out, especially if you have those numbers. I went ahead and added, I have 92 and 93. I went ahead and added 94 and 95 just to show you something about this. And what you end up with is mapping. Like here, we're mapping trace event 92. This is the name of it. And we're mapping that to the extended event name, database file size change. Hopefully that's familiar. We looked at that in a previous demo. And I said, I just know what it is. I'll tell you why later. This is how I figured it out. It also tells you the different columns, and how they map to the extended events action. I think probably at this point, I'm not so worried about the columns. I think the hardest part is figuring out the events. So you get the things that make sense by default. And if you want to add other things, you can always do that in the global actions. So this is really good. So if I look down further, I can see also 94, which is a shrink, and 93 is an auto grow, which we looked at before. 95 is an auto shrink. So you could capture these 4 different events in a profiler trace just with one extended event. So now you can use this query along with what you know in your trace files, your existing running traces. You can map those to extended events, and then you can break that dependency on profiler. Now, what you might want to do if you can't figure something out is you might want to fire profiler up just locally, just to grab what it is you might want to do, and then export out the trace definition and take a look at that. You might want to do that. On the other hand, in extended events, you also have those templates. So those templates might be what you need. But if you have to, fire profiler up just to figure out, these ID numbers. Let's go back to the slides and talk about what we can do with the data that we collect. Now that you have all the tools you need to create your own extended event sessions, what can you do with that data? So one thing you might want to do is to set up a SQL agent job that queries the ring buffer so that you can be alerted if a particular event happens. So let's take a look at how to do that. I'm back working in SSMS. So one of the things you might want to do is to set up a SQL agent job to capture the information and send an alert, because extended events in themselves don't send alerts. Okay, so I've got this query here. I did not come up with this query. I found it from an article, and I think a few other people have also promoted this query. You can find all of my slides and demo code if you just go out to my GitHub account. I have a folder on extended events, and you can find the information there. Go ahead and screenshot that right now so you've got it. But what I want to do here is to run a query that counts if there's anything in that ring buffer. Okay, so in order to use this, all I have to do, and let's see, I think mine is just tempdb growth, so let me make that match. So this has got to match your extended event session name, and the other thing that you might want to change is this number right there. This is the number of minutes to go back, because you don't want to keep getting alerted for things that happened 2 hours ago. So maybe you have a SQL agent job running every 60 minutes, and you can just go ahead and set this to 60 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and cross my fingers that we see something come back. And all we've got here is a count. Now, I ran a script that caused tempdb to grow and shrink, and I had also set the ring buffer to only capture up to 100 items. So that's why it's coming up with 100. I'm pretty sure it came up with more than that, but that's how many was the maximum. So I don't really need to know whether it was 105 or 110. I just need to know it happened, right? So what this does is just does a count of the number of events that were fired. And again, you can just take that query and just change those two little pieces of information, and you've got something you can use. Now, how would I use this in an agent job? So this is what I came up with. I changed the query around a little bit. What I ended up doing is changing this to a common table expression just because it was a little bit easier for me to read. And I also declared a variable count. So what I end up doing is just saving the count, and let's see, I gotta see if that matches tempdb growth. Saving the count in a variable, and then if the count's over 0, go ahead and raise an error, which will cause the job to fail. So at that point, you can have an alert set up if the job fails, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and see, I get an error instead of the count. I don't care about the number, I just care that it happened. So over in SQL Agent, let me just zoom in a little bit here. I think I've got a job already set up, and in these steps I've got the query that I just showed you with the count, and you can run it, let's say you ran it every hour, and then you could set up alerts, notifications, whatever you wanted to do there. So that's how that would work. So let's go back to the slides and see what else we can get out of that XML. I've shown you how to query the ring buffer so that you can set up a SQL agent job to send you an alert if a particular event happens. But what if you wanted to dig a little bit more into that data and you're not that familiar with XML and how to query it. So what I'm going to do is show you kind of how to dig into this XML. This particular data is a little simpler and follows a couple of rules that you may not see in other XML. So while what I'm showing you kind of pertains to other XML, this is very specific to extended event session data. So if you looked at the ring buffer, and I did show you that during one of the demos, you'll see that it looks like this. I have the ring buffer, and I can have one or more event inside the ring buffer. If I use the nodes function of xQuery and tell it where I want things split, so at this point I want things split at the event level, I can get data that comes back like this. So tabular data, even though there's XML in each row, but each row contains one event. If I expand one of the events, it looks like this. And just in case you're not familiar with XML, the major items that are underlined there, those are called elements. Okay, so an element is what you see right next to that less than symbol. You also have attributes. Attributes are basically properties of the element. So I have many data elements here. So it's like an array. These are the default items from the extended event session. Those are those default data items that's collected. Each one of these has a different name. And within an event, the name here is going to be unique. Now, this is different than any other XML because it's following some specific rules. There's nothing in XML that says I couldn't have two data elements named duration. But in this particular XML, there's only going to be one. I also have an array. In this case, I've just got one of them, but I have an array of global action elements as well. I can pull the properties or the attributes by using the value function. Okay? And in this case, I am telling it to pull the timestamp, and this is the very top element, so I didn't have to, have any kind of a breadcrumb path down. It's the very first element, the outside element, so I just had to say it was timestamp. I also have to give it a data type, and this is a SQL Server data type, the closest that matches. Another thing you've got to do here is provide an array index, basically. In this case, in this particular data, it's always going to be 1. Okay? That's going to be different if you work with other XML, but if we have, following along with this, we only have in our event, we only have one event, so we're going to grab the first one. Not quite the same as an array index, because that would be 0, right? So in this case, it's 1. I can also grab values from the data elements. In this case, I have to kind of filter that with which one I need. In this case, the database ID one. I have to specify data, where earlier I didn't have to say, since timestamp was the top level, I didn't have to kind of drill down. In this case, I say that it's one of the data elements. Again, I've got that array index, and in this case, it's also maps to int. And I can do the same thing with the action elements as well. So let's take a look at how to put this into practice and query any part of that data. I'm back working in SSMS, and in this demo, I want to show you how you can apply some of that X-query yourself. I'm going to run this and just explain what we've got here while it's running, because it does take about 16 seconds to run. I'm using the value function 4 times here. So what's happening is that has to be applied to every item in the list. So this is not light. I also want to point out that I've replaced the count here with these individual items. So I'm looking at the data element. I'm filtering to look at just is automatic, the first one. And in the case of the XML from extended events, it's always going to be just one. And then it's mapped as a bit. So I'm looking at whether or not it was an automatic file change, the size of the change, the file type, and the database ID. And it did take 18 seconds to run. So this is a technique you want to use sparingly. And this is querying the ring buffer again. If I take a look at the information, you can see that I've got some growth on the data file of tempdb. If I scroll down far enough, I can see where I've got the shrinking of the data files. So what I might do with this is take that information and from the select list and pop it down into a filter. So you could do something like that. I'm going to go ahead and run that. In this case, I've only got 2 items. You might want to do something like this. I really suggest that you try to put the filters inside the extended event session instead of doing something like this, but you can do it. And it might come in handy. If I was going to run, let's say I had just a file growth extended events session and I didn't have any filters in it and I wanted a separate one for tempdb, I could go ahead and put the filter here and then just run that once an hour, for example. I don't think that's going to cause too much of a performance impact. I wouldn't want to run this over and over and over every few seconds. That would definitely cause a problem. So this is, what it's worth. It might be useful, but I just wanted to show you that it's really not that difficult to query using XML, and I am definitely not an expert on XML. I just figured this out from looking at other examples from other people, what they did. So, you can use it, or, just go ahead and put all those filters in your extended event sessions. You'll end up with more extended event sessions, but that might be the right thing to do. It's definitely going to have a lesser impact on your server than trying to use this value function on the XML itself. So far, all the demos I've run have been in SSMS, but you can also use Azure Data Studio to look at extended event sessions. It's an extension that you can add to ADS, and ironically, it's called SQL Server Profiler. I'm not quite sure why they use that name. There are a couple of default extended event sessions available to look at there, and you can take a look at some specific views. You cannot, at this point, create your own that you can see there. You could create one with a script, but you wouldn't be able to see it. You'd have to take a look at SSMS to actually see it. So let me show you how that looks. In this demo, I'm working in Azure Data Studio, and I'm going to show you the functionality available for looking at extended events in ADS. So the first thing I'm going to do is just run this query against a DMXE sessions to see the sessions that are running. So I've got database events and TimpDB growth that are sessions I created, and the other ones, it looks like they are system sessions. So I'm going to come back and look at this as we work through this demo. So to get the extended event functionality in here, you have to install an extension called SQL Server Profiler. So to install extensions, click over here. If it's a Microsoft one or most of the published ones, you'll see in the list. So if you type in Profiler, you'll see it there and you can install it. So once it's installed, in order to get to it, there's a couple of ways. You can go to View, Command Palette, and search for Profiler. In this case, since I've been using it, it popped up to the top, and you can also click Alt-P. One of the things that I've found about this is that it's been around for about 3 years, and all the different articles that I found on it really showed different functionality. Things have kind of changed over time. So what I'm showing you is how it looks in August 2021. It might be different in September or even later this month. So once I click Launch Profiler, I see I can create a new session, and I have my choice of 2 different templates. So I'll go ahead and create that one, and I can also change the name here and click Start. So once I do that, you can see events popping up into this window, and as far as I can see, this is only a live window. I can't save the data, I can't go back in time to look at it, so only live data. If I go back over here and rerun this query, you'll see that I can now see this in the list of active extended event sessions. If I just close this up, the extended event session continues to run. However, that data is not really getting collected anywhere. I can also change to look at this in different ways. Again, that cleared out the data. New things have got to happen for it to populate. I can also pause it here or stop it. Once I stop it, I can come back over, run this again, and I see that it went away. Once I've stopped it, I can either create a new session, which brings me back to the same dialog. I'll cancel out of that. Or I can select any session that lives on the particular server that I'm connected to. And you can see, for example, configuration items change. That's one of them we looked at earlier. I'll go ahead and start that. And then if I come over here and run this again, I now see this in my list. So now it's started. I can see it. If I look over at Management Studio, I'll see it's running, and also here. Just playing around with this, let me just move this up to standard view. Just playing around with this, I don't see that it actually does any good except for being able to turn on or off the extended event session. So I've just run these a couple of times. If I come back over here, it didn't really collect anything. So I'm not sure what good that is, at least at this point, except for stopping and starting these sessions. So that's the functionality right now in ADS. I'm going to say it's not great. If you really need to look at extended events, you're going to have to, write some queries, or you'll have to just run SSMS instead. So let's head back to the slides and take a look at the next item in my list. One of the things that's pretty easy to do in Profiler is to capture the parameter, the value that's being used to call a stored procedure. And what I and some other folks found was that it was kind of hard to figure out how to do that in extended event session. My coworker, Grant Fritchie, also known as Scary DBA, figured out how to do this, and he wrote up a blog about it. So that's how I figured out how to do it. Luckily, folks like Grant and Aaron are out there figuring this stuff out for the rest of us. So let's take a look at how to do this. I'm back working in SQL Server Management Studio, and I wanted to show you how to set up an extended event session that will show you the stored procedure parameter values. So here is go ahead and bring up the properties, the extended event session, and it has the following. It has module end, RPC completed, SP statement completed, SQL batch completed, and SQL statement completed. So those are the items that are being collected, and doesn't have any extra actions collected, and no filters. Oh, there is a filter. In this case, they're all filtered on the database name, which you may or may not want to do. And then in the event fields, we've got the statement selected. And I can also just script this out. And if you take a look at Grant's blog post, he's got the script for this as well. So you can see that there's the module end, RPC completed, statement completed, etc. And also that it's being filtered for AdventureWorks. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and let's see if we can capture it and watch the live session. Once in a while, it's harder to capture it in the live session because it seems like there's like a buffer it has to fill before it pops it in there. But let's just see. Let's close that one. And let's go ahead and run this. And it is running. The extended event is running. And let's see if it captured it. So you can see there the module end and the SQL statement completed. Both of those had the stored, parameter value there. So if that's important to you, then you know where to look. There's one more thing I'd like to show you, and that's causality tracking. Again, this is one of those things that Grant Fritchie figured out and wrote a post about. Basically, this means that when there's a lot of events firing, some of those are related to each other. So how can we easily look at those grouped together? So let's take a look at how that works. I'm back in SQL Server Management Studio for the final demo of today's session. And what I want to talk to you about is causality tracking. So I have this session right here that's disabled at the time. And if I wait for a sec and then zoom in, you can see how causality tracking is enabled for this particular extended event session. So I'm going to go ahead and start the session, and then I'm going to run a transaction that changes all of the addresses, all the cities in the address table, and then rolls that back. So if I take a look at the event file and view target data, and another thing I don't think I mentioned about the event file is that when you open it up, it shows you what's there. It doesn't show you live updates. So, you know, if you don't see what you expect to see, maybe close it and reopen it, and then you might. So when you have this particular property set, you get this attach activity ID GUID value. So if you can find one of the statements that you're looking for example, here's my begin tran update, and then if I right click on that and say filter by this value, and click apply and OK. So what I end up with is the only things left to look at are the events that happen for that particular statement. So everything around, for example, autostats, statement recompile, anything that's associated with that particular statement, for example, the begin tran, and that might be the whole, I'm not sure if that's the entire thing, begin tran, and rollback. So everything with this batch, everything associated with this batch has the same GUID, and you can analyze that and see what's going on. So that's really all I have to show you today. So let's go back to the slides. Well, that's all I have to show you about extended events today. I want to say a special thanks to Microsoft and to all the other sponsors for supporting this wonderful event this week. I'd also like to thank you for spending about 75 minutes with me today, and also for attending the conference in general. There are some prizes. You can win a prize by posting a selfie with the hashtag DPS 2021, by giving session and conference feedback, and also by visiting the sponsors and exhibitors. Be sure to follow the Data Geeks and Data AI Summit on Twitter, and thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions this week. Bye for now.